Thank you. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I am grateful to you for your warm welcome. And Dr. Francisco Ayala, thank you very much for your very generous introduction and also for your outstanding service on the PCAST, advising the President. We're grateful to you and your colleagues. To the President of the AAAS, Dr. Rita Colwell, and the incoming President, Dr. Jane Lubchenco, and to all of the officers and distinguished guests who are present, let me single out some very distinguished colleagues of mine in public service. Senator Paul Sarbanes, who has been acknowledged previously, and Mayor Kurt Schmoke, the head of the State Senate here, Mike Miller, and I believe Governor Paris Glendening had to depart for the State House, but I want to acknowledge all of them as a group. And to all of the distinguished guests present, thank you very much for the invitation to come and speak here today. I appreciate you braving the cold weather. It's been so cold recently that those who don't know me well have thought I was frozen stiff. That's all right, I'm used to that reaction. I've heard most of those stiff jokes by now. Every time I hear a new one, I always have the same reaction. Very funny, Tipper. But I do enjoy being Vice President very much. In fact, I went on the David Letterman show not too long ago and was asked to give a list of the top 10 best things about being Vice President. I won't go through that list here today, but I'm reminded by this podium here of number 5 on the list of best things about being Vice President. It has to do with the Great Seal of the Vice President. If you close your left eye and turn your head just right, it says, President of the United States of America. You can experiment and validate that result for yourselves. Over the next 3 days, I will be delivering 3 speeches on America's science and technology challenges. Tomorrow in Virginia, I will ask how must we update our notions of self-government to bring them into harmony with the new discoveries and new capacities of the information age. On Wednesday, in Philadelphia, I will celebrate the 50th anniversary of the ENIAC computer, the first programmable computer, and ask, are we providing the necessary spark to ignite private innovation, new industries, and better jobs? But today, before this extraordinary collection of minds gathered here in Baltimore, I want to ask the question that in many ways must precede the others. What is the role of science in American society? Why does science matter anyway? These are, of course, complex and broad questions, and no one person has all the answers, and I certainly don't. And in fact, before I proceed any further, I would like to recalibrate your expectations in case they need it. As you listen during the next half hour, think of our session as being similar to a biology class, but don't think of me in the role of the professor, rather in the role of the frog. So as you prepare to pick apart what I have to say here, let me begin by describing a deep but little noticed change in the pond of our public life. Not too long ago, when the debates here in Baltimore raged on about the design of our self-government, the metaphors originating in science migrated easily and frequently into the realm of political and economic affairs. In previous generations, the logic and lingo of science, from Newtonian physics to the industrial science of Frederick Taylor, informed our public conversation and enriched our shared understanding of the phenomena of our lives. But not today, or at least not in the same way. During the early decades of the scientific revolution, many of those who participated in discussions about the great discoveries of that age themselves migrated from the world of science back and forth into culture, politics, economics, business, and the rest. Today, if you look objectively at the sheer number of new discoveries that illuminate our understanding of the physical world around us, the discoveries each decade, each year, each month overwhelm the number of discoveries in any comparable period of time during the early years of the scientific revolution. And yet, the number of these new explanations which migrate in the form of metaphors into the broader culture seems to have declined, perhaps even in real numbers, but certainly on a relative basis. As a result, the language we use to discuss public problems is less vivid and less robust than it ought to be. Chaos theory might offer clues for when government should intervene in the economy. Economic policy might focus less on priming the pump, an old metaphor, and more on imprinting the DNA. But it's very difficult to strike up a conversation about the multitude of new explanations coming out of science today, even though, as I've said, some of them have surprising explanatory power. Ilya Prigogine, 2 decades ago, described how a closed system, when forced to contain a sharp increase in the amount of energy flowing into it and through it and out the other side, an open system rather, will break down and spontaneously reorganize itself at a higher degree of complexity. We see in our social structures a similar phenomena going on right before our eyes, with the world's population increasing by 1 billion people every decade, with the amount of real energy in society increasing at a logarithmic rate. Older, reliable, well-known, trusted structures seem themselves to break down and then spontaneously reorganize themselves at a higher degree of complexity. What are we missing by not describing these phenomena in the language and metaphors of science? We either avoid scientific metaphors altogether, or we lean against the crutch of industrial age metaphors, the clock, the machine, metaphors that are splintering with age. In particular, we continue to rely on the metaphor of the factory, of mechanized mass production, well after it has exhausted much of its supporting force. Today, in the spirit of academic inquiry, I'd like to propose an alternative metaphor, one more appropriate to the times and more muscular in its power to explain. It has been said by others that our society is shifting from the organizing metaphor of the machine to the metaphor of the computer. I think it's a computer of a particular kind, and specifically, I'm attracted to the metaphor of distributed intelligence. In the beginning of the computer era, when ENIAC was created, and for several decades after that, computers relied almost completely on huge central processing units surrounded by large fields of memory. And each time a task had to be performed, the CPU would send out to the field of memory to retrieve the raw information it needed to solve the problem, bring it back to the center, perform the calculation that was needed, and then distribute the answer back into the field of memory. Some clever computer scientists improved on this model with an approach called vector processing. IBM first got its competitive advantage by starting the second trip out to the field of memory while the first was still underway, but each of the bits of data retrieved had to still be stacked up to await processing by the CPU. Then along came a new architecture called massive parallelism. This broke up the processing power of the central processing unit and distributed this intelligence throughout the field of memory, so that wherever memory was stored, there in close proximity was placed a much smaller, weaker, but ubiquitous information processor. When a problem was presented, all of the processors would begin working simultaneously, each performing its small part of the task, and each sending its portion of the answer to the center to be collated with the rest of the work that was going on. Experience seems to demonstrate that for the majority of problems, this approach is more effective. Instead of requiring 3 trips to and from the CPU, only 1 trip is required. Less heat is generated, more power can be contained in a smaller space, less time is required for the processing. But more complicated software is necessary, and that has been the limiting factor. This idea of distributed intelligence, as revolutionary as it was in the computer world, never traveled to other regions of our life, and certainly didn't come anywhere near politics. But I think that in spite of that, the basic principles illustrated by distributed intelligence can be seen throughout our society. What was the victory of representative democracy over monarchy or dictatorship, if not a demonstration of the advantages of distributed intelligence in the political sphere? Here in the United States, in our revolution and in our Constitution, we asserted the revolutionary idea that the average citizen is better able to understand the information that is yielded by the circumstances of his or her life and make decisions accordingly than any ruler in a central location sending out to the hinterlands for information upon which to make a decision. And the cumulative result of the distributed intelligence embodied in democracy turns out to be far superior to the decisions made by a dictatorship. Similarly, what is the victory of capitalism over a command economy, if not a clear demonstration of the power of the marketplace in billions of small transactions quantifying supply and demand, when collated, guiding the economy much more wisely than some central planner attempting to keep up with consumer preferences, backlogs, surpluses, shortages, shifting production capacity, new innovations. It's impossible. The Soviet Union and communism generally collapsed economically as economic activity accelerated, and it became impossible for a central decision maker to keep up. This same principle illuminates the reason why private sector organizations are shedding their layers of middle management and pushing power, information, and influence to frontline employees. The person on the old assembly line or behind the desk interacting with the public or working on the word processor is better able